This one's wife. Will she respond to Dad's emotional manipulation? Hello, I'm H.G. Judah. As you know, this one's wife has had nothing to do with her father for roughly 6 years. People talk about the fact that they are estranged, but to understand what's truly gone on, one needs to look at the dynamic between two narcissists. Thomas Markle Sr. has sought to assert control over his daughter through repeated pleas to her, pity plays, which he has broadcast to the world through a number of interviews that he has taken part in. Presumably, this has been because he has no direct means of asserting control over his daughter, who is a non-intimate secondary source in his fuel matrix. He will not sit each and every day dwelling about the relationship or lack of in relation to his daughter, but she will come up on his radar with a degree of frequency as a consequence of the fact that she's likely to be mentioned by other members of the family that he remains in contact with, and of course she is somebody that is repeatedly spoken about and broadcast about in the media. This means that each time he is reminded of her, his own narcissism asks in the subconscious, is she under control? The simple answer is, he has no information because he has no contact with her. His narcissism must then try and bring her under control, but it's evident that he doesn't have a telephone number on which he can contact her. He may not even know her address in Monty Shit Show to write a letter, for instance, that he doesn't have an email address. It's not as if he's able to try and hoover her by proxy by perhaps asking his children to contact her, as they have also been disengaged from in a similar fashion to the way that this one's wife has disengaged from him. Thus, the first assertion of control direct is denied to him, and therefore his own narcissism causes him to go to the second assertion of control, indirect, which is to speak to the press, to speak to broadcast media, to talk about his daughter and to talk about how upset he is as a consequence of the way that he has been treated. What he is doing is he's utilising the truth of the situation. She is the one that's cast him adrift, and his narcissism tells him that this is hurtful. The watching public, of course, fully understand that a daughter who has nothing more to do with her father, and a father who at one point did as much as he possibly could for her, raising her single-handedly when her mother went missing, and paying for her education and getting her acting gigs, many people watch that and regard it as reprehensible treatment by her. The majority of people would think that her behaviour is awful towards him and thus affords him sympathy. Accordingly, his narcissism is using the truth of the situation. Objectively, it is an unpleasant scenario and causes people to feel sorry for him, which provides him with fuel, and with people explaining that his daughter has behaved in a reprehensible manner towards him, provides him with the subconscious control that he needs. This one's wife disengaged from her father, as I have explained previously, because quite simply, he offended her innate need for control on two fronts. Firstly, he was becoming increasingly difficult to control as a consequence of his own interactions with the media, which potentially meant that he could expose her behaviours in some way. Secondly, and moreover this was the more important factor, he had simply expired in terms of his usefulness towards this one's wife. At one point, he was hugely important in the fuel matrix. Although a non-intimate secondary source, and therefore of only moderate fuel potency, he was particularly important with regard to residual benefits because of the financial support that he provided and the fact that he enabled her to progress her position within her career. Furthermore, she utilised his character traits and residual benefits to control other people. For instance, it's stated that at one point there was a school production where he, as an Emmy-nominated lighting director, was involved in providing the lighting. This one's wife issued a threat in relation to her own participation, stating that her father wouldn't provide his lighting expertise if she didn't get her own way. On that occasion, her bluff was called, and the relevant authorities did not cave to her demands, and nor did her father. He felt that it was appropriate to continue to provide his services. But that is just a rumoured example of the way that what her father provided to her was useful at the time. Having moved into a different stratum by virtue of marrying into the royal family, her narcissism essentially said, "Your father is of no use to you any longer. His fuel isn't particularly important. There are plenty of other people who can provide you with much more potent and larger amounts of fuel. You can control him by having nothing to do with him," the third assertion of control. His character traits have become worn out, and ditto his residual benefits. Add that to the fact that he was potentially threatening her control with the potential to make disclosures about her, the narcissism decided that the disengagement trigger was applied, and thus he was disengaged from. Remember, this one's wife doesn't think in such terms, but that's the explanation of what is going on to help you understand the dynamic between them. Her narcissism will have simply caused her to believe that he was an unpleasant man who couldn't be trusted, and, as one suspects, caused her to concoct a rather unpleasant rumour about him in relation to how he had treated her as a child, in order to convince the likes of Harry not to push wanting to ever meet him. Accordingly, whilst Thomas Markle Sr. continued to want to have some involvement with his daughter, by virtue of his own narcissism wanting to assert control over her, her narcissism stated, "Ditch him," and thus she did. She feels no guilt about this. As a narcissist, she has no sense of conscience or remorse. Her narcissism repeatedly tells her that what she did was entirely appropriate. Now, Thomas Markle Sr., as he approaches his 80th birthday, has once again sought to manipulate his daughter by issuing a pity play. It has been covered in various newspapers that he's conducted a further interview stating that all he really wants for his 80th birthday is to reconcile with his daughter. There will be those that don't understand the narcissistic dynamic, that think this is simply a father who wants to connect with his daughter again. But there is more going on than that. His own narcissism is causing him to want to get her under control. Think about it. If it was genuine, why would he not do this in secret? Why would he not do it privately? He could arrange, for instance, for Doria to convey a letter. I'm fairly certain he would be able to get in touch with her. He could, for instance, contact her agency. He knows which one represents her, and supply correspondence to them with a request that it be provided to her. Whilst he may not have the means of approaching her direct, as I explained earlier on in this video, there are means of him privately seeking to convey his feelings and beliefs to her. He could arrange for a process server to serve the correspondence on her. It wouldn't take too long for them to find her whereabouts and approach her personally, or even go to the appropriate address of where she is staying to hand deliver the correspondence from him. But he hasn't chosen that route. He hasn't chosen that route because his narcissism has determined that it's unlikely to meet with success, that taking that route is likely to result in it being ignored. And instead, his narcissism has directed him to issue once again a public pity play, where rather than keep the dirty laundry of the Markle family between themselves, he has been moved to undertake a further interview. And thus, that is what has happened. Not only has he undertaken this further interview, but it has been the case that this has been brought to the attention of various news outlets for the purposes of trying to cause this one's wife to feel guilty about the continued ostracization of her father. It is a doomed tactic. First of all, she feels no sense of guilt or remorse, as I explained earlier on. Furthermore, his attempt to embarrass her into getting in contact in order to guilt-trip him offends her need for control, resulting in her narcissism simply nullifying it by ignoring what's going on, not responding, and certainly for no reconciliation taking place. Once again, by understanding the narcissistic dynamic between these two individuals, you're able to understand what's really going on in relation to their actions. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for watching.